You are listening to PowerScore's Law Practices podcast series. Today's topic is estate and trust law. Today's guests are Robert Mucklestone from Perkins Cole Law Firm, Brian Starr from Starr Law Firm in Phoenix, Arizona, and Jeff Forer, an attorney with Hinojosa and Wallet. Our first guest, Jeff Forer, explains the practice of estate and trust law.
It's pretty much runs the gamut of producing people's estate plans, drafting whatever documents they need or find necessary for their estate plan to do their testamentary wishes. It includes trust and estates litigation, which is, a whole bunch of trust litigation. Now that everybody's more or less using living trust, doesn't change the litigation. There's still more litigation. Mostly anything from removal of trustees, accountings, to undue influence and creation issues. And then you have your probate, your basic probate areas, which are fairly statutorily driven. A file, somebody dies, they don't have a will, or somebody dies and they have a will and they have property that doesn't vest immediately to somebody, so you'd have a probate, and that's really nothing more than a court-supervised transition of the property. Then we also deal with conservatorships for the infirm, and we deal with guardianships, and both in the formation and the administration, and there's some litigation in those too as well. For the conservatorships, it's whether or not there should be a conservatorship, whether or not the conservator needs to sue third parties to get those particular assets into the estate, the conservatorship estate. And guardianships, it's usually a different claim. A guardian usually sits in as a plaintiff or thereabouts.
Robert Mucklestone explains that if students are interested in this practice of law, they should understand that not many people are within the tax range of having true estates.
Well, there's a lot of tax issues involved when you get into people that have assets of any significance. But primarily, it's kind of the general. Many, vast majority of people do not have estates that are into the tax range, but many do. And I suppose, more empathy with individuals and what their problems might be, and to provide a solution for what would happen to their assets.
Our third guest, Brian Starr, says that he was lucky because in law school he was able to get a clerkship that helped him understand the practice of estate and trust law.
I was lucky. I had a clerkship with a superior court judge at my in the same town as my law school that taught me a lot. So get as much real-world experience. I guess if I was going to do it again, I would contact probate and estate planning attorneys and see if you can help. It sounds maybe a bit unfair, but perhaps even offer as kind of an unpaid intern just to kind of get an experience and get an understanding of what's out there to make sure it's something that you would really enjoy. So I guess contact attorneys and practice in the area. And what's helped me a lot is building a network.
He continues by explaining how important it is to build a great network of clients.
What's helped me a lot is building a network. For whatever reason, in Phoenix and Arizona, big firms don't do a lot of this type of work. This is generally lots of smaller firms and even solo practitioners who do this work. You kind of need to build that network and know who else is doing it in the field, and so you can bounce questions off of them, or just you kind of work together in this field. It's not one way. It's different from litigation. Is you work together. You're not really adversaries. So it helps to know the people you're working with, the other attorneys. So start building that network, any way they can. There's all kinds of, I'm sure, as I'm talking, I'm thinking, I'm sure through each law school there's ways to do some sort of pro bono estate planning clinics or things like that. There was one I did. It's called Wills for Heroes. I think it's a national thing that also helped me kind of start building that network.
Jeff also says that students shouldn't be afraid of income and estate taxes. Understanding these concepts are extremely important within the practice of estate and trust law.
Well, first of all, you shouldn't be afraid of the word income tax and estate tax and those sorts of things, generation skipping tax. You shouldn't be afraid of those concepts. It's just another body of law, and it's pretty much a code law. You know, what's included in the gross estate, what's not included in the gross estate, what's a marital deduction, all those sorts of things are all from the Internal Revenue Code, the 2000s for the estates and the 2500s for the gifts. And you should have some sort of comfort with that. Don't be freaked out that it's numbers, because as lawyers you don't crunch the numbers. You don't do that. You just have to handle the concepts. And so if you want to go into trust and estates, that's one thing. The second thing that you need to know if you're going into trust and estates is that you need to be comfortable around people and prying into their deepest, darkest secrets. And by that I mean, we know when I draft someone's estate plan, I know how many times they've been married. I know all the kids they've had and haven't told anybody about. I know what they have, where all their assets are, and all of that stuff. And so when you're an estate planner, you have to be somebody who is folksy enough and makes people feel comfortable enough to where they want to disclose all that information to you. So you got to be a good listener. Got to be a good listener. You have to try to understand what people want and how they want to transfer their assets. And that's on the estate planning side. If you're going into the trust and estates litigation area, it's basic litigation, but it also includes those personal elements. And you're sort of, it depends on which side of the V you're on. By V I mean whether you're a plaintiff or an objector or a petitioner. And in those cases, you have to get to know what happened. Usually, in a litigation case, somebody's dead, and you have to reconstruct how they put together their estate plan. So they kind of walk hand in hand. You know, doing an estate plan and doing the trust and estates litigation, you need to have all that knowledge, and you can't be. You need to focus on the very basics of human nature. I mean, I think that being an estate planner is one thing. It's sort of a supportive role, you know. But being an estate litigator is, you're more of an advocate.
Now, for students that are trying to decide what classes are best to prepare for this law specialty, Robert says estate planning and case studies are the most important.
Well, you say there's classes on probate administration, trusts, and I'm sure there's classes on wills and testamentary dispositions. And then usually there's I'm thinking back at the University of Washington where I went and where I a seminar on estate planning, so you get into more situations where there's case studies of what should be the solution for example, that a couple that children and how old they are, and maybe if there's a child that has special needs, how to cover that child. And of course, it can also seen probably more frequently than we have in the past is agreements for living together agreements for people that are not married, or maybe couples that are of the same sex. And that's a whole separate branch of estate planning as well.
Along with classes, Brian says that volunteer opportunities and internships can be very beneficial.
Try to build that network. Build that network. Get an understanding of what other probate attorneys do. Meet them. If I was to go through law school again, I would look even harder for volunteer opportunities in this field. Whether it's like legal aid who do estate planning for low-income people, that would be a great way to start meeting people. If there's any kind of clinics that do this, I've already mentioned Wills for Heroes. It's a program. I know it's in Arizona. I think it's national. That what they do is they provide estate planning for public service workers like firemen, police officers. I did one once. I went out to a correctional facility and did it for the workers. Did it for the guards. You do free estate planning. The best part of that was you learn a little bit about how to do estate planning, but you got to meet. They always bring experience, meet experienced attorneys who did it, and learn from them. So that's what I would do. Is if you are fortunate enough, I guess, to go to law school in a community where you might be working, I would even stress that even more.
Jeff agrees that externships and donating your time to learn the practice can be very helpful. He also suggests that reading as much as you can will put you above the rest.
There's first of all, you can assist people putting together wills. There's all sorts of public systems where you can go and volunteer your time, depending on where you live, and see if you can help the elderly. And you can help them put together some simple wills, and that gives you an idea of what's happening. You can. When I was in law school, I externed for the U.S. Attorney in the income tax area, and I'm sure you can do that with the IRS too. I'm sure they'd like an extern in there, and maybe you can, give some free time and sit in the IRS. I know some people would find that a little repugnant, but you could sit there and you could help out with their case, and you could see what the government's point of view is and start doing that sort of thing. So the U.S. Attorney externships are really good. Donating your time is really good. And start reading. There's all sorts of publications that deal with trust and estates. The American Bar Association has a magazine that they put out every month called Probate and Property, and that's pretty good as far as what's going on. And there's some good articles in there, and it gives you sort of a flavor for what's going on. Then there's also a monthly treatise that comes out called the Real Property Trust and Estate Law Journal, and that's also published by the American Bar Association. And that book is it's like a law review articles, so it's very in depth on certain issues. And start looking at the cases. There's usually, depending on where you live, they have a local bar. And for instance, in Los Angeles, where I am, they have the Daily Journal, and in the Daily Journal they have cases that come down that are trust and estates cases. And you should read those. You should check those out and read those. Your local bar area probably has its own newspaper, and you should check that out. And you should read the cases that deal with trust and estates, just to get an idea of what's going on in your area in the Circuit Court of Appeals, etc.
In his final advice, Robert explains how important federal estate and gift taxes can be to estate and trust lawyers. He also says it is a sophisticated area of law.
Well, one thing that we haven't touched on is and this is would be included in one of these courses, probably the wills and the probate administration, getting into the federal, the U.S. estate tax, the U.S. gift tax, U.S. generation skipping tax, and income tax for estates and trusts. So that's a whole kind of more sophisticated area that if they're going to get into the field of estate planning, they need to have a really thorough background of that. And in our interviewing associates here in our area, we almost would want most often to have a master's in taxation in estate taxation. So either just U.S. taxation or estate and gift taxation.
Brian finishes his thoughts, continuing his advice of working for free and making sure you know this is the type of practice you want to work in.
I guess going kind of back to the last point is also, I guess, make sure this is really what you want to do. I guess I wasn't sure different points throughout going to law school what I wanted to do. So just get out and meet people and get a better understanding of how people work in this field, what they do every day. Again, if I was to do it over again, I would look for more volunteer opportunities to meet, do real world, either estate planning or meet other people who do it. And I would also push a little harder to try to get clerkships, internships, whatever it is, with these firms that do this type of work. And it'll take some prodding, because my hunch is in most communities, it's not really the big firms. Big firms all have one or two people who do this, but most of the time it's lots of small firms that do this type of work. So it's a little harder to get in touch with those type of people to see if they could use a hand. But that's what I would do if I were to go through it again. I would work harder at doing those volunteer opportunities and doing perhaps even offering to work for free in somebody's office that does this kind of work, just so I would learn the field a little bit better.
Now, when Jeff was in law school, he took a lot of tax classes, but he offers some stories of the type of circumstances you might run into as an estate trust attorney that school may not be able to prepare you for.
I think if you want to be a trust and estates lawyer, you should become a trust and estates lawyer. When I started out, I went to Southwestern Law School, and then I went to NYU to get a tax master's. And I don't know that you need a tax master's in this day and age to practice in the area of trusts and estates. During law school, I took as many tax classes as they had, and I also took evidence. Obviously, I'm sure everyone has to take evidence, and wills and trust. And there's an advanced wills and trust course. And just if that's what you want to do that. Find a firm or find some practitioners who deal in that area of law, and see if you can maybe get a job with them as a clerk or a file clerk, and start to get involved. Normally, firms say, "Well, you don't have enough gray hair, or you're not old enough," and that's a bunch of bunk. I mean, if you want to practice trust and estates law, you can do that. Just stick with it, and just remember that when you're doing trust and estates law, people are letting you into their innermost thoughts. So you have to be respectful of that, and you have to have a bit of a voyeur in you, because the stories that you get. I'll give you a quick story, because I know I have to give a war story. When I started practicing trust and estates law, I had a man come over, and he had a gas station, and he had cancer in his lung, and so he was wheezing throughout the whole interview, and he was telling me about how he wanted to take care of all this so that he could get in his motorhome and he could go fishing and eventually die. So, okay, So we talked about what he had and what he didn't have. We talked about his family, and then we talked to, he was currently married, and he had no children. And he had this guy at the gas station that worked with him who he really liked, and he wanted that guy to get his gas station, and he wanted his wife to get his house. And that's pretty much it. And so we did the estate plan. We talked for an hour, and I took my copious notes. And I put together his estate plan. He came and he signed his estate plan, and off he went going fishing. And 6 months later, I got notified he passed away. Well, his wife came into my office, and she said to me, "Oh, my goodness, he died, and he was such a good man." And apparently, he was an executor of an estate. I go, "Really? Do you have the papers?" And she says, "Sure, I do." So she gave me the papers, and she showed me the papers, and the papers showed that he was the executor of somebody who, it was in the papers, it said he was her husband. I said, "How could he be her husband when he's married to you?" She said, "Well, I guess the papers never came through for the divorce." I said, "Oh, so you're not his wife." Yeah. And then I found out that the kid at the gas station was really his son from another marriage. Now, I didn't have a lot of experience, so I didn't know the right questions to ask, and so it kind of went over me at the time when I was doing his estate plan. But the point is that they're going to tell you their story, and then you need them to back it up. You need to back it up because you need to do the best job possible for them. And the more estate planning you do, the more stories like that you're going to wind up with, and you get these unexpected curveballs thrown to you. But it's really a good area of practice. And while you're dealing with death and taxes and all that stuff, you're dealing with people that actually have some sort of concern for their family when you're doing the estate plan. And when you're doing the litigation, you're kind of involved in that sort of like, it's not the corporate merger, impersonal stuff. It's not criminal law. It's sort of family law with a death in the family. And so what I tell everybody who wants to get in that area, it's a wonderful area of law to practice in, and this is my 28th year doing it. It's gone by pretty quick, so it's really a worthy area of practice, and I would encourage anyone who wants to get into it, do that.
Thank you for listening to PowerScore's podcast series. If you want more information on PowerScore's podcasts or services, please visit PowerScore.com. Or you can call 1-800-545-1750.